hear from
Philip Reeves, Principal at Mercantile Strategies, is a proven leader who has provided advisory services for numerous growth-oriented firms from nascent startups to Fortune 500 businesses. Most recently, Phil established DC's first program focused on providing full lifecycle technical assistance and mentoring to over 160 small businesses and startups pursuing federal R&D funding.
Hey, how's everybody doing? I think we're gonna get started in just a second. We'll let a few folks come on in, but I want to keep us on time. First, I want to welcome everybody here to the Financial Modeling for Entrepreneurs webinar. And I want to thank USBC for having me. I'm really excited for this series and really excited to, have this conversation with you all. And so before we get started, I think it'd probably be helpful to give a little bit about my background, sort of an overview of what this topic will be about and sort of what I hope you all get out of it. So my name's Philip Reeves. I'm with Mercantile Strategies. I'm here in DC and predominantly do a lot of work around R&D in the defense community, and then more relevant to this group, work in the venture capital space, particularly around financial modeling, strategy, pitch deck, investor, raising capital, the whole deal. And so my background, I came to the space. I actually got my first exposure to financial modeling from Wall Street. And so I used to do financial modeling on these very large deals where we're looking at millions of dollars in revenue and, how we could project these things out and what happens if we bought the company, if we sold the company, what if we did a merger, what if the strategy changed? And so that's kind of how I learned the baseline of financial modeling. But it's something that's, I think has become more and more important for every entrepreneur, really. And even in my own business, I do financial modeling for myself and my own company. And so today, what I want to talk about is a couple of things. One, I want to talk about why financial modeling is important to you, the entrepreneur, and how to use it really as a tool for your goals, whether that's raising capital, having a strong company, growing your business, making decisions. You can use financial modeling for all of those things. I want to show you how. I also want to help you understand how to use financial modeling as it relates to investors. How do you get investors interested? How do you talk to them about your model? How do you convey your model? And then finally, I want to talk through how do you build a good model? So what does it really look like? What does it take? Unfortunately, because of really the format and the time, we're not going to be able to do sort of a deep dive custom, model on, a specific business. Models are almost like fingerprints. Everyone's different. Everything's unique. Different assumptions apply to everyone. And so it's too difficult to try and do it. If we did an example, it would be too niche. It wouldn't apply to everybody. And so what I think makes more sense is for us to stay at a macro level and talk through guiding principles that I hope you all can apply. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about what is a financial model. And really, we've got a definition on the screen, but really the goal is we're trying to simulate a business and project its future. So the tool we're going to use and everyone uses for these models is Excel. And sometimes I've heard people use Google Sheets. I probably wouldn't recommend that. It's much more classic to use Excel. But really what we need is a tool that's going to allow us to project a business and understand how it's going to operate in the future with different operational scenarios and assumptions. And really, the whole goal here is that models tell stories. A model can tell you if something's going to work. It can tell you if a business is going to fail. It can tell you if your idea makes no sense. It can tell you how much money you're going to make. It can tell you how many people to hire. It can answer a ton of questions about specifically your business. And that's the beauty of it. It's something that's unique to you, that's unique to your business. And the way I think about financial models is, if you think about building a house or constructing a house, I think of financial models as almost the blueprint. And so if you imagine what the role of a blueprint is in construction, is to lay out directions for everyone. If you're the foreman, you're getting, your input, you're understanding what you're going to do next, but it helps everyone sort of get on the same page about the building. So The electrician knows where the lines are supposed to go. The plumber knows where the water's supposed to go. And the client, if you're the client or if you're the architect, you can decide, hey, I really don't want that bedroom there. I want that to be at the back of the house. I really don't like that kitchen. I prefer it to be a galley kitchen. I'm not really a fan of open concept, or, yeah, I really like the backyard. Let's add a tree here. Or what if we add an entire floor or a new addition? And so models give us that same sort of capability. And the important thing is they're a living document. And so you want to have one, and you want to have one that goes with you and with you into the business. It's not something that's one and done. It's something that you can really use as a tool. And so we'll talk about that. And the last thing is, with modeling, it's something that you can do. I'd be remiss if I didn't leave the webinar, letting you know that this is something you can do. I mean, you'll hear about these super complex models where these math geniuses do all these statisticians, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be simple, and it can be enough to sort of convey your point to yourself and your investors. So what's the purpose of a model? And these aren't in any particular order, so I'll cherry pick a couple and we'll shift the order around. To me, the first one is to think through a business and understand what's driving it. No matter what your business is, you need to really spend time and think about it. A lot of times I talk to entrepreneurs, or I'm advising entrepreneurs, and they'll have an idea, but they sort of just have the beginning worked out, or they've worked out the sales, but they haven't worked out the cost, or they've worked out oh, we're going to sell in this volume, but they haven't worked out the staff it's going to need. Oh, we're going to have all this inventory, but they haven't figured out where they're going to store it. And so we want to understand through a modeling exercise, what are the costs and what are the revenues that we can really project? And the whole point of that exercise is to build confidence. Build confidence that if we execute this plan according to this model, it'll give us the returns, the business growth, everything that we're looking for and that our investors are looking for. And most importantly, it'll build our confidence. That's the key there. The second reason why we want to build a model is we can find out what are our key assumptions and how do we validate them. What has to be true in order to make this work? So I'll give you an example. Let's say, for instance, recently I was talking to a client. We were working on financial modeling for flipping a house. And a lot of that relies on buying the house in the first place at the right price. So if you're going to say, hey, we're going to invest $100,000 to buy the house. We're going to put in $50,000 to fix it up. We're all in for $150,000, and we're going to sell it for $250,000. Well, the big assumption in that point is the $50,000 to fix the house. And so if we build a model, we can figure out, like, hey, what if it really costs us $60,000 to build the house? Do we still make enough money to make this interesting? What if it takes us $100,000? Is it still interesting? And so a lot of that work, models give us sort of a sense of what are those key things that have to be true. If you work in, let's say your business is an app, and you're going to sell advertising on an app. Well, your prevailing assumption probably is how many downloads can you get? So then what has to be true? What download number do we have to reach in order to make this interesting? How much do we have to sell ads for in order to make this interesting? Those are big assumptions. We got to validate those. And so models can help us do that. And this sort of points to the third point. Models help us answer questions about different scenarios that might arise. So say, for instance, we can't get the ad revenue we need. What happens? How does that affect our business? Will we have enough cash flow to make it to the next month? What happens if, we're doing software development and our software gets delayed by 6 months and we can't launch for 6 months? How does that affect our revenue? How does that affect our cash position? What happens if we can't achieve the sales goals we need? In fact, we can only get half of the sales goals we projected. How does that affect our business? So we can look at those different scenarios in a good model and understand really what we're trying to do is sort of back to the first point. Are we confident in those numbers? Are we okay with those scenarios? And then really, how do we defend against them? If losing half of our revenue will crush our business, how can we make sure without a shadow of a doubt that we will not lose half of our revenue? What can we do? Those are the things that models help to drive. And the last point, or not the last point, but the second to last is, if you're going to bring on investors, a model lets them know that you take their capital seriously. If I'm an investor and I invest in your business, I'm putting a lot of faith in you, the entrepreneur. And so your task, particularly the early stage of investors, is really to get me comfortable. And so if you could, one way, and we'll talk much more about this, one way to do that is to use a model. And so I can see as an investor, well, yeah, you know, I believe in these revenue goals. I think these costs make sense. I think that this margin is achievable. That helps me to understand that you're taking my capital seriously and that you've thought through this. And that's something you'll hear throughout the entire webinar, is that you've thought through your business. And the last thing is to lay out a set of assumptions, a set of metrics and milestones that will guide your company's development. Remember, working on a model at the beginning of a business is valuable. It's key, it's critical. But just once you start the business, you still want to use the model, because the model said, hey, in month 3, we're supposed to be doing $50,000 worth of sales. And here we are in month 3, and we're not hitting that number. We know we have a problem because our model sort of gave us that insight. It's almost like go back to the blueprint example, or think of it as a map. The model showed us the way we're supposed to go. Are we still sticking there? So that's sort of the purpose of this whole thing, is to lay out something that we can achieve no matter what, and be comfortable we can achieve it. So let's talk through how a model can help with fundraising. And so I pulled this example from a Techstars company called Sure Payroll. And you can read the slide, but the general story is, the Sure Payroll CEO was out, they were out fundraising, and they were going through their deck, and like every good deck, they had a slide about financials. And so every investor would say, hey, I'm sure on the summary slide, it probably had, revenue and kind of projections. All the investors would say, what's driving these numbers? And of course, they would say, we have a really detailed model that's backing up our numbers. And so the investor, of course, asked to see the model, which a lot of investors will. And instead of handing over the model, the CEO of SurePay sat down with the investors and walked them through the model line by line, cell by cell. And according to him, he did 8 meetings where he walked through the models with all the VC firms in 90 minutes, and every one of those VC firms did the deal. And so the point there is a couple of things. One, obviously having a strong command of the numbers is critical. It's not something that you push off to a CFO function, or you push off to your accountant, or you push off to your advisor. You, the entrepreneur, the CEO, the founder, you need to know these numbers intimately, because people will ask you and you'll be the one that has to defend them. And so being intimately involved with the model, again, it helps you sit with investors and get them comfortable. And so in this scenario, the CEO is able to sit with the VCs. He's walking them through the model. And then if you sort of picture what that's like, it's really a VC saying, hey, what about this sales assumption? How'd you get there? And then the CEO being able to say, oh, well, we got there because of, our historicals point to it, or we're already seeing early data that points to this. Oh, our conversions, we're already converting our ads at this percentage, so we're confident they'll go forward. And so that story illustrates, and I think it's a good one, illustrates how to really use a model as a tool to help with fundraising. All right, so let's get into it a little bit. How to build a model, how to build a good one. So every model has 2 sort of really macro ideas. The first is, and this is that theme we'll keep coming back to, well thought out projections about the future of the business. And what that means is, I think about this as sort of like case interviews for consulting firms. A lot of times, in consulting interviews, they'll ask you things like, how many ping pong balls can fit in an airplane? And the point of the question is not to say, oh, well, there's, 1.2 million ping pong balls can fit in an airplane, or whatever your guess is. The point of the question is to walk through your thought process. And so, hey, well, let's assume a ping pong ball is, 1 inch round, and let's assume an airplane is 12 inches, which is not, by 12 inches, then we know that, based on the volume, 12 by 12, 144 ping pong balls can fit in the airplane. It's a very simple example, but it illustrates the idea of what I mean when I say well thought out. The whole thing is thinking through your business in detail so that you can walk someone through it to the point where they almost see it in their mind. That's the story I was talking about on the first slide. And the second point is a properly structured, understandable, and dynamic spreadsheet. And what we're looking for is, remember, it's an Excel spread. Ultimately, this is all going to boil down to an Excel spreadsheet. And so it just needs to be something that folks can follow. You'll usually show, some sales assumptions. You'll show some expenses. You'll show cash flow. How does money flow through your business? I can see that on a model. You'll show things like, what are your startup costs? How long will it take to do this? A classic example is sort of when you think through sales, you'll see people sort of come out the gate with these very high sales numbers. And the challenge is it begs the question, well, how are you gonna, in day one, do these amazing sales numbers? And so what you'll see a lot of times is people sort of ramp their sales up, and they'll say, oh, well, in month one, we'll do 1, and then we'll do 2, and then we'll do 3. And that story makes a lot more sense. And so we should be able to see that. And on the same thing, a good, model, you can change some of the assumptions and the sheet will change with it. So if I change, if we're selling pens, which we'll come to later, if we're selling pens for $1 and I decide, and I'm sitting down with my team and we decide, what, we don't want to sell dollar pens. We want to sell premium pens. Let's sell them for $100. I should be able to go in the model, type in 100 into one cell, and the whole thing changes. That's what I mean when we say dynamic. All right, so let's talk about projections for a second. And you can already see how I feel about these two viewpoints. So there's two theories around projections. The first is top down, and the second is bottoms up. Top down is when you hear someone say something like, let's use the pen example. The pen market is 50 billion. If we can get 1% of the market, we'll be a $500 million company. You should invest in us. And we'll come back to it. So let's contrast that with the bottoms up method. The key of the bottoms up method is being able to build something from the bottom. And so it doesn't have to be what we have right here. It could be if we sell 1 pen a day, or if we sell 1 pen for every, however many calls we make, or what we have here, we have a manufacturer that signed a PO that'll give us pen cost of $1 if we go to 1,000 pens. Our cost per click is $2 when we do it on Facebook. And when we put an ad on Facebook, 1.5% of times we're going to convert. And so what we mean by that is, and this is sort of e-commerce thing, cost per click is, let's say you're doing anything really on the internet, you can buy traffic. And so you might say in this example, you guys are doing on Facebook and you've seen those ads on the left and the right. Well, if you click that ad, then the advertiser will get charged. So let's say we click the ad, and when someone clicks the ad, Facebook charges us $2. But then when someone comes to our site, for every 100 people that come to our site, 1.5 are going to buy a pen. So you can figure out pretty quickly if we have the right conversion number and the right cost for the pen, and we know our ad count, we can figure out pretty quickly, well, how much if I invest X dollars in the ads, how much revenue will I get? And we can see that on a model. So let's spend a second on why the top-down method is not as strong. And I get it, by the way. You want to show there's a big market. And I think sometimes when we talk about pitch decks, we talk about what's on the slide and the voice track that's with the slide. And so there's always going to be the slide. If I was actually pitching a pen business, of course, I would have a slide that was, a $50 billion market. But the way I would get to the, our revenue amount would not be through this method. And the reason why is, if you sort of break down the sentence, if we can get 1% in the market, that's sort of that one statement is sort of the whole challenge with the whole top-down method. Yeah, because it begs so many questions. How will you get 1% of the market? Like, what competitor will you take out? Why would they give it to you? How much will it cost you to get that 1%? What's your sales price? If you got 1%, what kind of operation do you have set up that's going to give you that 1% of the market? And it begs so many questions that immediately investors, teammates, partners, that they can't figure out, they can't see that picture we're trying to paint. And so if you can't give them this detailed picture, a very strong blueprint, a clear map, whatever the analogy is, then we're going to lose them. And we contrast that with the bottoms up method. Well, yeah, it costs us $1 to make a pen. We sell it for $100. We're an e-commerce company. We advertise a lot through Facebook. Based on our conversions and our cost of ads, we think we can achieve these sales numbers. That conversation lends itself to, well, awesome. I got your e-commerce company. I see how you're going to market. Talk to me about your Facebook costs. How do you know the $2 number is correct? And then we can validate that assumption. Or, talk to me about the 1.5 conversion rate. How does that work? Or if we were doing a restaurant, we'll come back to that example. So that's the idea. I mean, the whole topic here before we leave off is you want to build your model up from the beginning. And predominantly, you want to start with things that you can control. And what I really mean by that is start with, when I first do this, I always start off with sales. And so with sales, what are the things that I can control? What are the things that you can control that will drive your sales? And so say, for instance, you sell enterprise software. The thing that drives your sales is how many calls you can make. Can you really make 100 calls a day? Okay. If you can make 100 calls a day, how many of those people will come to a meeting? Or can you get to a meeting? Oh, we can get 10 to a meeting. Okay, well then can you close one person with every 10 meetings? Yeah. And you can see that sort of walkthrough. You can see someone picking up the phone 100 times, making phone calls. We're assuming they have a pretty good list, but that's an easy enough assumption. The thing we're questioning is, can they really get 10 meetings? Yeah, I mean, pretty good pitch. We probably met the team before. We think they're pretty compelling. We like the product. Yeah, if they call 100 people, they'll probably get 10. Even better, if they've called 100 people already and they've already had 10 meetings, and that's just their historical numbers. So that's a lot of where we're getting at, is building something and then validating it. So let's use this last example before we turn to some questions. And so again, we're going to use the pen example. It's not that I'm fascinated with pens. Sometimes I wonder, if there were a pen company that had like a mid-range pen, an e-commerce pen company, how would that do? And so this was my take on that. So instead of building out the model, what I want to do with you all, sort of think through what the assumptions are. And so you can see just by how much, text is on the page, with a very simple product, a pen, there's still a lot of things to consider. So first we have to think through, what's the cost to manufacture the pens? Even better if I can tell you, I already have, a supplier picked out and I know the cost. Any assumption I can validate is always going to be best. So, hey, I know the cost of pens. I have a supplier. They're ready to go. What's the cost of packaging? I got a packer, they give me pens in a wooden box. I've already figured out that the wooden box costs, $2.50. Okay. What's the web hosting? I'm doing an e-commerce company, so I'm going to use Shopify. I can go to Shopify right now and see how much they charge. Okay, I can work that cost to the model. CPM and CPC, again, I'm going to buy traffic. So how much am I going to invest in the traffic? What am I, what's the cost per click? What's the cost per impression? Conversion rates. How well do I think this website's going to convert? If I make a Shopify site and I buy some Google AdWords or some Facebook ads, how well will that conversion happen? Amount of staff needed. And this is one of those, it illustrates, I guess, what I think is the importance and complexity of and I guess the benefit of modeling. So if you think through our pen example, we haven't really thought through the operations of this business. So where do we get these pens? I mean, if they come from China, where are we going to store them? But more importantly, who's going to take them out of the box and put them into the new wooden box that we bought? Who's going to run all these AdWords we just talked about? Who's going to design this copy? All of those things. So do we need staff for that? If so, let's put it in. Let's put those costs in there. Reorder rates. Are people going to order more than one pen? Will they buy one pen and then lose it and then order another one in 6 months? Should we model that? Discounts. Are we going to give a discount to every customer? When you guys ever go into a website, sometimes it'll pop up and it'll say, before you leave, it'll say, oh, we'll give you 10% off. Okay, well, if we're going to offer that, we should probably reflect that cost. How much are we going to spend on traffic? How much organic traffic are we going to get? How many people are going to search for pens on the internet and are going to come up to our page? How many times can we get into a magazine and get people to talk about our company? And so you see some of those key assumptions on the left, but it drives a lot of new questions that we need to think through, and that's the point. We talked about storage, we talked about staffing. We can answer questions now. How many pens do I need to sell to break even? Am I going to do a PR campaign to drive organic traffic? I need to get a sense of, if we're going to do a lot of Instagram posting, is this really a good strategy? How many Instagram followers does my competitor have? How many Facebook likes does my competitor get? Am I going to need an expert or Shopify or e-commerce? Are we going to get defects? If we're going to have this awesome website, we're going to need to do a photo shoot. Can I get a photographer? How much is that going to cost? And so if I were doing this model, I would put all these assumptions down. I'd start mathematically breaking them down. But the very next step would be, how do I validate as many of these assumptions as possible? That is really the goal here. What you want to end with, when it's all said and done, is a model that gives you confidence, that gives investors confidence, and that has a lot of really thorough, thought through assumptions. And so, but before we leave, there's two things I do want to, make sure I mention. The first is, when you're doing a model or when you're thinking through it, don't get so bogged down in the model that you fool yourself into thinking that it's gospel. So you'll start modeling like these super detailed things and, oh, well, what if, all these what ifs and what happens. And what you end up with is this very convoluted thing, and you end up getting away from what you're really trying to understand. And so try not to get so bogged down into it that it becomes intimidating or less meaningful. We're trying to figure out directionally where we're going. And the last thing is, a model is not a crystal ball. It doesn't predict the future. One, you, the entrepreneur, you still have to carry the water. You still have to execute the plan. The model is the plan, but you need to execute the plan. And it's just, real life happens. So things move around. And so you're not always going to know. So stay responsive to real life. Don't just say, oh, the model says this, so this must be true. Just because we model today that, in February of 2018, we're going to do X thousand in sales does not mean it's going to be so. We need to stay grounded in real life. So before we leave, I know I didn't get too much into the details of modeling, how to write them or how to build them. Here are two blog posts that I think do a really good job of talking through modeling. I think they point to a couple models and they point to some templates. Before we hop turn over to questions, a note on templates. There's two schools of thought. One school is use a template anytime you can. The other school is never use templates. And the Never Use Template School, their theory is if you use a template, and I guess this is my point of view, and I'm not saying never, but if you're going to use a template or, whatever it is, if you're going to have someone build a model for you, if, your buddy's going to build it, whatever it is, you need to take ownership of it. You need to know it inside and out. If you don't understand, how a certain formula works, don't just forget about it. Find out how that formula works. Have someone walk you through, this margin where it just says margin is 20%. That's sales, that's cost of goods divided by sales, whatever it is. Understand everything that you can about the model regardless, but take a look at those resources. They should point you to more things and give you a good baseline to understand, I guess, going forward as you all build your own businesses. And with that, I guess I'll open up to any questions. Yeah, I'm happy to chat about anything, really. Oh, it looks like you can type your questions in the chat box. I'm making an so we have a question. I'm making assumptions in my model based on historical industry. Investors recognize this as speculation, right? How long should I spend looking at old data versus just using the best guess? So, what do you mind? What industry is it? Just for my own knowledge. So to this question about historical data and sort of real data, or not real, but historical data and more present value data, you can use historical data, that's fine. So for instance, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say we were looking at, I don't know, cell phone usage, festival production. Okay, love it. So that's a funny one, given the Fire Festival. So I think the historicals there. If I was looking at festival production, the historicals there I would look at would be like, okay, we know how much Coachella does in terms of, we can probably look up festivals in this genre in this region generally have this range of participants. Now, obviously, your festival's newer, so it's not going to have as many participants. So we have to discount that somehow. That's a number. That discount rate is something we'll just have to sort of. That's the thing we'll have to sort of get people to back us on it or believe us on. Is Coachella. Let's use Coachella. Coachella gets 500,000 people to come to the West Coast. Our conference or our music festival is also on the West Coast, for instance, but it's newer. Coachella is, across all genres. This one's only focused on country music, which I don't know if yours is. So we think we're gonna have a much lower number. That makes, we can get behind that assumption. Ticket cost is another good one for festivals. Festivals typically cost this amount, but we think that, we think we can get a premium to that, or we think we can get a discount to that. The thing there is going to be why. And so I think with this case, not the challenge, but the trick is, if I were an investor looking at that one, I would definitely want to understand the cost. So like, how much does it cost to lock in these artists? I imagine it's going to be a very big crew, a very big production, a very robust advertising campaign. So it sounds like a complicated model in terms of cost structure. So I want to get comfortable with the cost structure first. And then I'm going to think through like, okay, the real assumption is how many people do I have to bring to this music festival to make this financially interesting? And then that's the rub. Can I get this many people to come is really the question. And so I think then you're looking at, well, if I advertise through Spotify, SoundCloud, Instagram, Twitter, and I convert at these rates, there's a reasonable assumption that this number of people will come. That's sort of how I would think through that one. Another question. When you're in the startup phase, what variables are best to have in mind? So when you're in the startup phase, it depends on what you're doing. So let's say you're doing software. I'm working with a software client now, and they're in the startup phase. So one thing that we're very conscious of modeling is how much it's going to cost to create, I'll call it the MVP. How much is it going to cost and how long is it going to take? And so that's one. I mean, that because there's a lot of carrying costs with that. You know, oh, it's going to cost us $500,000 to make this MVP spread out over 6 months. The real question is, do I have a firm that's signed up, you know, for $500,000 for 6 months? And this is where modeling comes in handy. On a fixed price contract where if it takes more than 6 months, they don't get paid for that. And are they ready to hit these? Are they comfortable and confident they can hit the 6 month milestone? So that's a startup cost. I definitely want to think through, like let's say it's a restaurant. What are my real estate costs? What are my equipment costs? So, you know, I think in the startup phase, you want to think through what are the costs it's going to take you to get this thing off the ground. I mean, from beginning. I mean, even if you're doing a lawn care business, you're still going to need some advertising dollars. You're probably going to need to print some flyers, and you're going to need, of course, you know, a lawnmower and various other tools. So how much is that going to cost? And then I think what you want to think through after that is start thinking through revenue. What is that early? Who are those early customers that we can get? How much are we going to charge them? It's sports apparel. Ooh, that's interesting. So I think with sports apparel, I'm assuming you're not manufacturing it. I'm assuming that you're probably going to private label it from a manufacturer. And so that one I would think through is calling manufacturers and saying, what is the minimum quantity I have to order to get X? And how much does it cost per item? And that gives you a sense of the cost. And then on the sales side, I mean, I don't know, if you're selling through e-commerce, then it's one of those traffic, CPM, click-through rate sort of things. If you're selling through retail, then that's a different thing. But if you're selling through retail, then it's getting buyers, you know, what retail conferences, what retail trade shows are you going to? Who's going to be there? What kind of volumes are they going to buy in? Are you prepared to call mom and pop sports stores and get them to carry your equipment? Are you prepared to call mom and pops and get them to make an order? How many calls are you making a day? So, I mean, going back to the example, what are things that you can control to drive sales? That's what I want to model. Because then you know how much work you can do, and that gets everyone comfortable. You know you can call 10 stores a day. You know you can, you know, go to 10 basketball courts or whatever it is. Any other questions? Any other cool industries, cool businesses? Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. And of course, you guys have my contact. You know, I'm around. Okay, what's the process question? And when you say the process, what do you mean? Or about process? What do you mean? I don't see my performing with a business plan. I usually wait until they request it. Yep, that is a good sign. After this, I think I shouldn't send it without requesting to present first. Your example of walking us through the numbers is compelling. Do you think that's a bad idea? No, I think it's a great idea to walk investors through it. If you're comfortable, if you can command the model well, I think it's a great idea. Because even, I mean, if you think about it, in a bad scenario, someone's questioning your assumptions, but now you're in a dialogue about a pretty concrete thing. And then in a super worst case scenario, let's say, you know, oh, I don't think your unit price is $5. I think it's $4. Okay. If I can't convince you that it's $5, then let's just put in $4 and see what happens. And if it still works out that, you know, the returns are where they need to be, then, you know, all the more power to the investor. And so I like the example of, you know, I usually don't send pro formas to people without them requesting it. And so I like your sequence of letting them request a pro forma that is a really good sign, and then walking them through it. I think that's great. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for the time. Thanks to USBC. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, and looking forward to connecting. Thanks.